Okay, so they just announced the headliner for UFC Noche, and that's gonna be Diego Lopes versus John Silva. This is a banger fight. It really 100% is. I just wish that the UFC would have held off on this fight just a little bit longer. I think most fans were expecting Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopes, and in my opinion, that would have been a much easier fight to sell. A lot of fans were expecting that. We saw the back and forth that Diego Lopes had with Yair Rodriguez in that one press conference, and I think that was the fight to make. Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopes for UFC Noche. Obviously, it makes sense as well because this is a fight card, surrounded against Mexican fighters, and I think that having two Mexicans fight in this kind of magnitude, right? We're having Canelo versus Crawford. They should have just had Yair Rodriguez and Diego Lopes fight for this matchup. I think it would have made much more sense, But right now we're having two Brazilians, headline Noche UFC, which is kind of whatever. But I just really do think that Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopes would have been a much easier fight to sell. Not saying that this fight isn't good, but I just think that it made more sense for Yair Rodriguez to fight Diego Lopes. Anyways, this is a really, really big step up in competition for John Silva. If he is able to beat Diego Lopes, he is gonna 100% without a doubt beat all the allegations that this guy, just doesn't have the capabilities of being one of the best fighters at the featherweight division. Is going to be his black belt test. We obviously know that Diego Lopes is able to compete in every aspect of MMA. He has decent striking. I'm not going to say that he has the most polished or he's one of the best strikers in the UFC, but he has pretty decent striking. He's able to pretty much finish fights. He has knockout power. And he's able to grapple and wrestle. John Silva, in my honest opinion, I think he's gonna have a little bit of trouble in the striking. I think that his best chances of winning is going for grappling exchanges and wrestling exchanges, and just making this a freaking dogfight. This is 100% gonna be a fight surrounded the fact on whether or not John Silva is able to just get through this phase, And I think that if he does beat Diego Lopes, a lot of people are probably gonna say that he's not a fraud. He's a legitimate top contender in the featherweight division. People are looking at this as a big step up in competition for John Silva, and I would 100% agree because right now John Silva doesn't have the strongest resume, although I do think he has some really, really good capabilities in MMA. He's fighting against a top 5 opponent right now, and a guy that gave Alexander Volkanovski legitimate trouble in some of the rounds whenever he did fight against them. Now, without a doubt, it's kind of looking like Yair Rodriguez is going to get that title fight against Alexander Volkanovski, which I think is 100% without a doubt undeserved. I think that Yair Rodriguez beating a guy that has never fought in the UFC before doesn't necessarily give him the strongest argument on whether or not he should be next up to fight for the title. And that's just me being completely freaking honest, ladies and gentlemen. I think that Yair Rodriguez was maybe one win away from fighting for the title, maybe two, but I just don't think with the resume that Yair Rodriguez has right now in his last 5 fights should get him a title fight. Maybe he had some deal with the UFC, if he was to beat, a super dangerous fighter coming into the UFC, that would have gave him a title shot. Maybe they had like a deal like that under the table that nobody knowed about, and that would honestly make a lot of sense. But I just 100% agree with the sentiment that Yair Rodriguez is probably getting a title fight that's 100% undeserved, without a doubt. I do think also that Movsar Evloev is getting snubbed. He is having a fight soon, but I just 100% believe that the next fighter in line to face Alexander Volkanovski should be Movsar Evloev, and that goes without a doubt. Although I am an Alexander Volkanovski, fan, and I do think that he should face some of the best competition in the world. I just don't think that Yair is one of them. I mean, he did dominate Yair the first time around, right? I mean, that's not a secret. He got dominated literally round after round after round, and he got finished. I just don't think uh we're gonna expect anything different the next time that he fights Alexander Volkanovski. I do think that Volk is just gonna dominate Yair Rodriguez again, and who wants to see that? Literally, who wants to see that? Like Yair Rodriguez has proved that he's not in terms of being one of the best of the best. He does have flashy striking, and I do think that he is a fighter that has, a really interesting techniques, and he's able to make certain tactics to make him look really, really good inside the cage. But he has no business being in a title fight with Alexander Volkanovski because he's just gonna go ahead and get dominated. Alexander Volkanovski should be fighting some of the best fighters in the world. and Movsar Evloev right now is a guy that's undefeated. I think that's an easy ass fight to push, and I think that should have been the next fight coming up. But of course, you know, Yair Rodriguez is a bigger name. A lot of people just don't like the way that Movsar Evloev approaches the game. He has no finishes, you know, to his resume, and a lot of people just don't like that. So obviously, yeah, if the UFC is trying to make as much money as possible, they do make Yair Rodriguez versus Alexander Volkanovski. But I mean, who knows? Who knows? If Movsar Evloev is able to put on an impressive performance in his next fight, you know, who's to say that he doesn't get the next title shot? But as it stands right now, it kind of looks like it's gonna be Yair Rodriguez versus Volk, and that's 100% without a doubt undeserved, but a decent matchup, very very decent matchup. And again, I think that it's gonna be an easy title defense for Alexander Volkanovski. You know, and that's coming from someone that's Mexican. You know, I think that Alexander Volkanovski, without a doubt, probably dominates Yair Rodriguez a second time if that's the case. Hopefully, we do see Movsar Evloev have an impressive performance because who doesn't want to see, you know, two of the best fighters in the division face off against one another, right? I think that that's much more important for the sport, and that's much more important for the entire division because everybody, you know, who thinks there's the best should be fighting the best, obviously. And I just don't think that Yair Rodriguez is like even top three, you know, best in the featherweight division. At some point, though, I will say I would still like to see Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopes. I think that that's a fight without a fucking doubt. You know, that a lot of fans would really, really like to see because it kind of does seem like they have legitimate beef with one another. If you guys go ahead and listen to what they were saying to each other at that press conference, it wasn't no industry shit. Like they kind of do sound like they're beefing for real, for real. So that would be a blood match without a doubt. And I think that having resolution inside the octagon is the best way to just settling their beef. And I think that that would just be a fight that everybody would want to watch. So as still, you know, at some point, I would still really like to see Yair Rodriguez face off against Diego Lopes. Within the next coming weeks, expect to see a lot of people online saying that Diego Lopes is going to fraud check John Silva, which I think, I mean, let's just be honest, is a pretty bad take. I think that John Silva getting a matchup against Diego Lopes is still, you know, a good testament to where he's at right now in the UFC. You know, he's able to build hype behind his name as well as having, you know, skills good enough to even get a fight with Diego Lopes. Of course, Diego Lopes right now has the more impressive resume. I mean, he just fought the champion and gave him a competitive fight. He did get beat, you know, but he gave Alexander Volkanovski some trouble. I mean, he didn't give him an easy fight as well. There were some times where Diego Lopes kind of looked like he was going to finish the fight against Alexander Volkanovski, and times where I was scared for Alexander Volkanovski. Because Diego Lopes just looked like he was gaining momentum. But John Silva right now's best win is against Bryce Mitchell, and some people are just gonna go off the fact that, you know, Diego Lopes just has a better resume. MMA math, he beats John Silva, and John Silva gets fraud checked. In my honest opinion, that's a pretty dumbass, bad fucking take. But that's just the MMA world, and that's just the UFC world. Um, but I still think that it's a pretty good matchup. I think that we're gonna get more word on whether or not Yair Rodriguez does get that fight against Alexander Volkanovski very, very soon. Movsar Evloev, I still think, has to win a fight before he gets that title shot. Just build up a little bit more hype behind his name. And if he's able to beat his next opponent, I mean, who knows? Maybe he does get that fight against Alexander Volkanovski. But right now, that's the scope for the entire featherweight division in terms of the top of the division, the cream of the crop. And like I said, still pretty good fight. Diego Lopes versus John Silva doesn't really make too much sense for Noche UFC, but hey, whatever, fuck it, it is what it is. Neither was Marab or Sean O'Malley, and that was the headliner for UFC Noche as well. But it is what it is. We're gonna be making more videos about this topic as more news comes soon. So subscribe to the channel if you guys want to be aware of everything context for the UFC and the featherweight division. Subscribe to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. As always, it's a pleasure. Peace out and have a good one.